Greetings, Torah scholars. Welcome back to Advanced Judaism for Beginners. We're starting a new topic, the topic of Mitzvat Yeshuv Haaretz, the mitzvah of settling the land of Eretz Israel. In this topic, we're going to be discussing first the very nature of that mitzvah, that commandment. We're going to discuss, is it a mitzvah? Is it like an active obligation that one should be in Eretz Israel? Or is it a zchut? Is it a merit, just a merit if one lives in Eretz Israel? We're going to be discussing it starting from the very source in the 5 books of Moses and working our way down through the various Jewish sources. Later on, we'll be discussing religious Zionism, anti-religious Zionism. So I look forward to deliver the upcoming videos with Hashem's help. So, welcome back. It's been some time since I made the last video. Whoever is watching this, despite my long break, now I know who's loyal. Just kidding. It's all good. Welcome back. Welcome back. And I'm happy to deliver this video. So, first, when we're talking about Mitzvat Yeshuv Haaretz, the commandment of settling the land of Eretz Israel, let's just make few points. The first premise is that for sure the land of Israel is a holy place. No doubt about that. And by the way, why there's no doubt about that? We already have in the Torah where God told Abraham, I'm going to send you the first test that God tested, not the first, but one of the first tests, one of the tests that God tested Abraham to go to the land that I will show you. Already then we see that the land of Israel, it's the chosen land. And indeed, later on in the book of Kings, David is setting the foundations, specifically in Jerusalem for the temple. So we already see throughout the Bible about how holy the land of Israel is. Also, of course, we have the various midrashim, the various teachings that was being passed down through the sages that are teaching us about the land of Israel, that from Temple Mount the world was created, for example. And that's where Jacob also saw his dreams of the ladder of the angels going up and down. So indeed, the Holy Land is somewhere holy. But what we're going to be discussing, not about if it's holy or not, rather if we have an obligation, a mitzvah, a chiyuv, to actually go and live there. Just like we have a mitzvah, for example, to put tefillin, to keep Shabbat. So is Mitzvat Yeshuv Haaretz in that same sense an obligation, an active mitzvah? So that will be our discussion. So before we're starting the very first source that we'll be covering in the 5 books of Moses regarding that, what we're going to see that we're going to cover 2 commentaries, and I just thought in a few minutes to give a small background of, I would say, the 3 most famous commentaries of the 5 books of Moses. So you have the first one is Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He lived in the 11th century in Europe. He's from the first generations of Ashkenaz in Europe. He lived somewhere between the border of France and Germany. And Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, he's by far the most famous commentary on the Chumash. Chumash, that's what the book is called, where the 5 books of Moses is printed on. So it says that Rashi is so fundamental in learning. Rashi's commentary and explanation is so integral as part of the 5 books of Moses that they say that you need to read the 5 books of Moses with placing it with 2 fingers. One finger is pointing at the text, the actual text of the 5 books of Moses, and the second one is pointing at Rashi's commentary simultaneously in order to understand the text. That's how indeed Rashi became. And in fact, by the way, for someone who learns today Chumash, it will be unthinkable to think that for 2,000 years, the Chumash existed without Rashi's written explanation. Now, of course, a lot of Rashi's commentary is already teachings that was being passed down before, but but some not. Some it's his own commentary, and indeed he put it all in writing in the 11th century. So that is Rashi. And Rashi's approach to translate, to explain, to give his commentary in the 5 books of Moses, he says, Lefi pshutei shel mikra, only for the literal meaning of the text. Meaning, there are few ways to learn the text. There's the literal understanding, then there's the in-depth understanding according to Jewish philosophy sometimes, according to Jewish Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. But Rashi is choosing to explain the 5 books of Moses in the most literal meaning. And that's what he says. And that's why he becomes so fundamental in understanding the 5 books of Moses. So that's Rashi. The second, I would argue, the second most famous commentary on the Chumash is Ramban. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides, who lived in Spain in the 12th century, not to confuse him with Maimonides, who also lived in the 11th century. They almost overlapped in the 12th century. They almost overlapped. The Maimonides was older than Nachmanides, and they had few years that they actually overlapped in Spain. And Nachmanides, again, a giant of a figure, Nachmanides. He's famous for many things. One of them, he had a famous disputation, a famous debate with, unfortunately, a Jew that converted to Christianity in Barcelona. It's called the famous disputation of 1266. I believe it's 1266. So Nachmanides is famous for that. Eventually, by the way, due to that debate, he was forced out of Spain and made his way back he immigrated, made Aliyah to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel. So now Nachmanides, his approach to give his commentary on the Torah is much more, he elaborates much more. He'll bring various midrashim, teachings of Chazal, Jewish philosophy, Kabbalah as well a lot of times. So where you might look sometimes that Rashi has one small explanation on a specific verse, Nachmanides can have few pages of explanation on that same verse. Nachmanides tends to elaborate. Then that's Nachmanides. Then probably I would say the third most famous commentary on the 5 books of Moses, and that's Abraham ibn Ezra, Even Ezra. Again, another fascinating figure who lived also about in that same time, 11th, 12th century in Spain. And now what's very fascinating, I would say, about Avram ibn Ezra is that today, Avram ibn Ezra is respected both in circles that challenge Orthodox Judaism, they challenge the authority of the sages, such as Reform Judaism, also, let's say, Christians. They actually look up to, in many ways, to Avram ibn Ezra, and they'll quote him from time to time. On the other hand, Orthodox Judaism also respects Abraham ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra, and quotes him. Now, you would ask, how is it possible? Someone who is respected by both. So, Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra had a very unique approach. He used to love to challenge the understanding of the sages on various stories, narratives in the Torah. And I'll give an example soon. But he absolutely accepted Jewish halakha, Jewish practice as it understood and being passed down by the rabbis. So on one hand, when it came to the stories, to understanding of the stories, he used to love to challenge the sages. That's why a lot of Reform Jews love Avram ibn Ezra. They appreciated the fact that he challenged the sages. On the other hand, when it came to actual halakha, following the actual instructions of how to behave according to Jewish halakha, Jewish law, he absolutely accepted the divine halakha, the divine authority of the sages in halakha, and he accepted the halakha. And in fact, actually, he critiqued, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra critiqued the Karaites. That was a movement during his time that challenged rabbinic orthodox. They challenged the rabbis, and they challenged many aspects of the oral Torah. Now, Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra actually used to critique them a lot. So again, he accepted the authority in terms of halakha from the rabbis. In the stories, not so much. In the stories, for example, so the rabbis are teaching us in few teachings that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was a giant, I believe about 15 feet tall. That's the sages are teaching us. Now, you would ask, how would they know that? So it's very interesting. There are a few verses in the Torah that hint on that Moshe Rabbeinu was a giant. For example, it says when Moshe completed the tabernacle, the Mishkan, so he placed the roof. It was kind of like a curtain, a skin. Essentially, it was a skin of an animal that was the roof over the tabernacle. So it says uforas, and he spread out that roof. From here, the sages learn he was a giant. Why? Because the wording uforas sounds like he spread out, like in front of him, as opposed it doesn't say that he spread above him. So from here, it sounds that he was the same height as a tabernacle. So he must have been 15 foot tall. That's what the sages say. Comes Avram Ibn Ezra and his commentary says, well, where do you guys learn this thing, the sages? Absolutely not. No, it's not. He was regular height. So again, as you see, when it comes to the stories, he would challenge the rabbis. But when it came to halakha, he accepted the rabbis' divine authority absolutely. So again, fascinating figure. In other videos, we'll elaborate more on him. So I mentioned 3 commentaries. Rashi, who sticks to the literal meaning. Nachmanides, Ramban, who will elaborate in his commentary. And Abraham Ibn Ezra, that also explains in length, and also from time to time would like to challenge the sages. Not always, but from time to time. So I just wanted to give that background about the sages. Okay, so now going back to the mitzvah of Yeshuv Haaretz, of settling the land. So going back to that discussion, starting off with that discussion, in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, in chapter 53, it discusses the idea that the Jews will need to expel the 7 nations after the generation of the desert, meaning the 5 books of Moses are being given over to the generation of the desert, and God is giving instructions to the Jews, commandments, through Moses. And God is telling them that when you will enter the land, which will be the following generation, so you'll need to expel the 7 nations that existed, that lived there. Now, I do want to say the commandment of expelling the 7 nations that was applicable then, it's a topic that deserves its own one-day videos. And in short, the idea there is because the 7 nations did a lot of idol worship, so they lost the land because of that. So God is actually commanding the Jews that to expel those 7 nations. First, to give them a warning and to expel them. Now, so that's about the mitzvah. Now, in that context of the 7 nations, let's see what the book of Numbers is showing. So, Sefer Bamidbar, book of Numbers, chapter 33, verses 52. והורישתם את כל יושבי הארץ מפניכם, ואיבדתם את כל משקיוסם, ואת כל צלמי מסחויסם תאבדו, ואת כל בונסם תשמידו. Before I'm going to continue with the second verse, we're going to see that there's 2 ways to understand what is God commanding us over here, commanding the generation of the desert over here. 2 ways to understand. There's how Rashi understands it, and how Nachmanides understands it. Now, sorry, let's go back inside. So, translating the pasuk, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land. You shall destroy all their figured objects. You shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. Okay? Very clear. Now, we're going to see that here, if you notice, the first word is vehorishtem. Now, it's interesting. That comes from the Hebrew word Yerusha, meaning inheritance, to inherit something. Now, obviously, just for a minute to dwell on that word, vehorishtem means, it literally means to inherit, that someone inherits an asset, right? So usually the way in figure of speech, the way we speak, when you're saying a person inherited a certain asset, it means that he received an asset from his parents, right? That's what it usually means. Now, what does it mean when it comes to Yerusha, inheritance to a group of people? When God here is telling the entire nation of Israel, you all, plural, going to inherit the land, what does it mean? They're going to receive it from their fathers? For sure not. So there, what does the word ve'orishtem means? So in the translation that I showed you, it says that it means that you shall drive out the nations that live there. That's what ve'orishtem means. So when God is telling the Jews you should inherit the land, it means you shall drive out the people, the nations that are there. That's what the word ve'orishtem means. Now, the next pasuk, verse 53, again the same word, vehorishtem et haaretz v'yashavtem bo ki lachem nosati et haaretz l'reshet oisam. And you shall take possession of the land, settle in it, for I have assigned the land to you to possess. Here, if you notice in the translation that I'm showing you, the second vehorishtem is being translated, and you shall take possession. It's no longer about you shall drive out, you'll take possession. That vehorishtem. Again, in the Hebrew text, same word. In the English one. Now, Rashi is explaining it in the following way. Rashi, the first commentator, is explaining that Hashem, in the first verse, is giving us a commandment that you need to expel the 7 nations from the land. In the second pasuk, according to Rashi, is that God is still referring to the vehorishtem, still means that you will drive out, but, and then it says that you're going to settle there. Why? It's a warning that if you're not going to fulfill the commandment of driving out in chapter 52, then otherwise you're not going to settle the land. So again, I'm sorry, I went a little bit backwards here, but bear with me, please. Like this. Rashi understands that God, in verse 53, God is giving a warning to the Jews, telling them that if you will not expel the nations, you will not be able to hold on to the land. That's Rashi's understanding. So Rashi understands the chapter 53, the word vehorishtem, is also to drive out. So according to Rashi, there's a single mitzvah over here, to expel the 7 nations. In that mitzvah, verse 52 is telling us to expel the 7 nations. That's the first vehorishtem. And the second verse is telling us that if you will not drive them out, then you will not going to ever last in that land. That's Rashi's understanding. Nachmanides' understanding, in chapter 52, it's the same, that vehorishtem means to drive out. It's an active mitzvah of driving out the 7 nations. Chapter 53, it's a new mitzvah. The second vehorishtem means to take possession of the land and to settle there. Very interesting. So Rashi holds in chapter 52 and 53, there's only one mitzvah. That mitzvah is to expel the 7 nations. And verse 53 is warning you that if you're not going to expel the 7 nations, then you're not going to ever last in that land. Nachmanides reads the second Ve'orishtem in a different way. He says in verse 52, true, it speaks about to expel the 7 nations. But in verse 53, it's another active mitzvah, a new one, of settling the land itself. So again, I hope that was clear. I'm going to share a chart to also organize the information, and I hope that's a little bit clear. Now, I do want to say something very interesting. In today's Chumashim, some translate the Torah according to Rashi's understanding, some translate according to Nachmanides' understanding. So the one that I'm reading you actually, it's according to Nachmanides' understanding. For example, I also saw it in the Art Scroll, in the Edmund Safra edition. There, the first Ve'orishtem, they translate it that it means to drive out the 7 nations. The second Ve'orishtem, in verse 53, they translate that you'll settle, you'll take possession of the land. That's according to Nachmanides. I saw a different Chumash, like Kehat, Chabad's Kehat, where the synagogue edition, where there, both Ve'orishtem, they translate to drive out the 7 nations, which that is Rashi's understanding. So again, I hope that was clear. So let's just summarize what we did today. So again, in this video, we're going to be covering the mitzvah of Yeshuv Haaretz, settling the land of Israel. Is it an active mitzvah, an active commandment or not? That will be our discussions. Should we all pack our bags and move to Israel or not? We will be discussing that. So we covered a little bit what I would say the 3 most famous commentaries on the Chumash, which that is Rashi, Nachmanides, and Avram ibn Ezra. And getting into the topic, we saw from Sefer Bamidbar, Parashat Masei, the mitzvah of expelling the 7 nations. Now there, in verse 53, there's 2 ways to understand it. Rashi understands it that it's the same mitzvah of expelling the 7 nations, and Nachmanides understands it that it's a new mitzvah of settling the land, and we see different Chumashim translated differently. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I'll see you till next time, God willing.